money and they had finances. And, so they really didn't see Rwanda as having a genocide, because they thought a genocide can only qualify to be called a genocide if they have the capacity and they have the weapons. They have large weapons and they kill. They're like eliminating the whole community. That did not really come out well according to the United Nations view. And so they took a really long time until the May of 17 when they qualified the massacre as a genocide. That taking a long duration to qualify it to be called a genocide, and also the impact of when to act and how. There are also the problems in the United Nations structure. Here is that before the bureaucracy, I think in every organization there is a bureaucracy, but in the United Nations it was a hindrance to the action that was to be taken. Because to act they had to ask the Secretary General, then before it gets at the ground. I remember there's a document, there's a report that they were saying, yes, we are going to send the action, those that can act, but it's going to take a week, 2 or 2 months or 3. I mean, this is an agency, and yet they are seeking 3 months. I mean, it's not really rare, but it was the case here. Then, when to begin? The genocide began around let's say immediately the plane crash. There was supposed to be an action, but they waited and no inaction. So it's like 400 people were killed, and they continued, and this it was like a continuation of things that was not taken clearly both ways. They didn't really look at it in clear view. So that really took a great time to act. And then initially there was the militia, and there was before the Arusha Accord was in place, they were supposed to there were 4 groups. Then to join the organizations, the RPF was supposed to join with the RPA, then to make one military group and another group from the government that was ruling. So there were youth that were removed from the military. Those youth were supposed to the weapons they had were supposed to be collected, and that was not done. And yet the French continued to support the government by giving more arms. So it's like there were arms in circulation, which was not supposed to be the case. Then installation of false confidence to the Tutsi. This is where we find that the Tutsi they are going to the United Nations or in churches and sanctuaries to seek for refuge, and yet the United Nations is sending a paper that all the United Nations group should be removed from Rwanda. So in this case, it's like you are telling we are here for you, and yet you leave them disoriented. So that in a report that says that gave the Hutu a good number of Tutsi to kill all at once, because it's like 2,000 people are seeking, they have refuge, and all of them are killed. So it's easy to kill them in one place. Yeah, that was false confidence that the United Nations gave the Tutsi initially before they were removed, before they took the action of going out of the country. Dealing with the consequences rather than the violence. In this case, the consequences were they took an action later after everything had happened, and the violence had already perpetrated and done a mess. The consequences, they were dealing with the consequences of what could have been prevented rather than violence, or the early warnings. Then they did not involve the regional organization. This happened when the United Nations came in. The OAU had already some strategies, and the Tanzania had, the president was actually involved very much on the peace negotiations, and there was competition on who acts best. So there's a competition between the United Nations and the regional actors, that is mostly was the OAU. So the competition brought inaction, or brought, not really inaction, but it's like they want to see who wins. So they are not converging anywhere, they are just diverging, and the crises are still continuing. That's not involving the regional organizations or the regional groups. It's also a challenge in the United Nations. So here we looked at the non-African countries who would or could have done something. The Belgians, as the colonizers, would have had the capacity to act, but they didn't. Because in favor of the Belgian, you can say, because the 10 Belgians were hacked and killed, yeah? If after killing the Belgian, also the spirit of helping goes down. So they really had, yes, they had the capacity, they would have added the military to that group. But those that are being helped are killing them. So it's they were the first group to withdraw from the UNAMID group. Because the Hutu had the mentality that if you see a blue hat, they used to wear blue hats. If you see a blue hat, those are also enemies, kill them. And they're supposed to be helping to regulate the conflict. So yes, they had the capacity, but also they got demoralized by the Hutu killing their military. And in 1982, they knew that there could be a possibility of genocide. And also the contingency part later that was withdrawn as a result of the report that the US was really instilling to the government, to the countries that had the military in Rwanda, to remove everything and leave Rwanda to its fate. So France, in this case, well, they had the capacity to act, but in this case, they were acting like they are promoting the genocide, because they continued helping the government, which was acting against the human rights, giving the military weapons and finances to continue the massacre. So at the moment in the international tribunal, they have been, France is being said to have acted a major role in participation of the genocide. And also, this was something after the prime minister was killed, her husband was killed and she was killed and her husband, but the children escaped. I don't know how. And then in this case, there was other Rwandans, the elites or the higher group in the country, they were removed from the country. So that's leaving the minority group of the Tutsi at risk, because there will be no one, if the group that is above, or the rich, even they say, have been removed from the country, leaving the minority helpless. So they are at a greater risk of being killed, because they'll be saying no one really cares if those that have the elite have been removed. That was around April 94. The US, being a major actor or a major contributor in the financing of the United Nations, had the capacity. If you watch the documentary of the Ghost of Rwanda, you'll see Clinton going to Rwanda later after the genocide and saying, yes, we knew, but we just sat in our offices. but yet he didn't say what he could have done. He just said, yes, we knew, but we just sat in our offices. And a newspaper says, but he didn't apologize of not acting. There's this act of omission, because the intelligence unit is from the United Nations, the United States, and yet they didn't act. So this is a very great act of omission. And also, not declaring it to be a genocide until it's very late. And the discrepancies with the Secretary General of the United Nations this is where the United States government was sending a mail, or was communicating with the United Nations and saying that they should remove all the armies. I remember the general was left with the Ghanaian military only. All the rest countries. And the US was skeptical. That is, they didn't act on the information we got because they were viewing it as hypothetical. It's just a theory. The worst case scenario is it's not true. It's just a presumed thing. Then it's a major veto. It's a power veto. So it's like if it doesn't act, they're supposed to act because they're supposed to help in the United Nations. The African nations, we have talked much of this, about Tanzania. They took an effort to mediate the civil war. Zaire didn't have interest because they didn't want to act against the government. Uganda helped the RDF initially and contributed to the mediation process. That is the Arusha Accord. Other actors, like the Red Cross and the Seventh-day Adventist and other humanitarian agencies, but yet they had the fear of dispatching the information concerning the countries. Like if they knew that French for sure was helping the government to continue the human rights violation, but yet they couldn't say that. There was that fear of saying it. There was no clear outlaid model of conveying information. So it's information from anywhere and everywhere. Everybody's giving information about Rwanda, the BBC, the local media. There's no clear information of strategy of giving the information. Then the lack of attention to read and the early signs and act on them. And also there was inaccuracy in some reporting media, but with a few of exceptions, like the BBC gave exactly what was happening on the ground. Rwanda actors, and that is the government and those that could have acted, and the OAU, which I've talked about what they would have done. So they had the skeletal staff, and it's like they acted in competition with the United Nations and setting because the African military was available, but they didn't have finances and